Okay, now it's time for us to create the schema. So for those of us that will be asking, what's the meaning of schema? Schema actually means the structure of the database. So you have to make the structure of your database before you can post anything into your database. So that's the first thing we're going to be doing, schema. So for that, we're just going to be creating another folder entirely, and we'll create it in the root directory. So the folder, we're going to call it model. So model, they are the definitions of all schema. So this is a model. So the next thing that we'll create inside the model is the schema we want. So I'm going to call this user schema. So user schema, it doesn't have to be the same name with mine. You can create something else. User schema.js. Okay, that's the user schema.js. And here we go. So since we have the user schema.js, how do we bring in and how do we create our database? So this is where we actually need, the Mongoose. So we're going to go in and require Mongoose. So we'll store it in a variable called Mongoose. So const Mongoose. Then we just import. We require Mongoose. So that's good. So we can then come in and bring in. Now, for those of us that will be surprised that this is just ES6 way of importing, and I also kind of have an auto import installed on my system. You can go down to your extension here and just search for the auto imports or auto imports or whatever the case name would be. You'll see some other auto imports for whatever you're creating, and that's what I'm actually doing. And it gives me the room to auto import. So for example, if I type in Mongoose, right, it's asking me if I want to auto import it. So I can decide to auto import this Mongoose and boom, hit enter and it auto imports it. Is that okay? Instead of doing the requirement. So from now on, I'll just be auto importing, right? So now let's move on. So the next thing that I want to do now is to create what is called a schema. So we're going to put this in a variable. So we'll say let's user schema. That's the structure of the database, how the structure of the database is going to look like. Now, for those of us that are coming from SQL, so it's also very, very similar. When you're creating your table, you want to create the structure of your table. So that's called a schema, right? So we're creating schema. So the name of the schema is called user schema. So it's going to have this. It's going to be mongoose dots, and it has a method called schema. But we're going to make an object out of it and say new, right? Then we'll say mongoose dot schema. Whatever way it's going to work, even without putting the new keyword. So mongoose dot schema. So this is going to be the structure of the schema. These are the objects, and this is going to be the definition. So when we start writing what we want as our schema, so the first one we want to create is the ID. So we want to create a field called ID, and the type that we want in the ID is a kind of a unique type. Now, if you want to put in your properties, you can put it like this. Let's say, for example, I think I should just keep, okay, let me start with something else before the ID. Let's assume I want to collect some data from user, right? I want to collect their name, the password, and the username, right? Or the email. I think I should just make use of email. The email, the password, the confirmed password, and the name, right? So the first thing I'll just say name, right? I'll create name like this. That's a field that I want. Or I can say full name. That seems to be a keyword. So full name. So I can say full name, and I'll put this is an object. So I can just write in that I want a string. This is a shorthand form to say the data type that I want is string. But if you want to do the longhand type, you're going to put in this and say type. So type. You're going to tell us the type. So the type is string, right? So that's the data type. Then if you want to put in something else, maybe you want to put in some other properties, you're going to put a comma, and put in the properties that you want. And let's assume you want this to be unique. You want the full name to be unique, you know, or you just want it to be at a certain length. So you can read some of the documentation of the properties. Don't forget, I said every developer should learn how to read documentation. It's very, very important. So you can read a lot of documentations about this, all the properties that are available, then you can then bring it in. So it doesn't make sense if the full name is going to be unique. So let's go to username, or what we will call the email. Now, in this case, you agree with me that you can actually want it to be unique. So you can say the data type, the type you want is a string, and you can say unique. You want it to be unique, and you can bring that and say true. So it could be true, or it could be what? False, as the case may be. So if you want it to be unique, you're just going to bring this out and say unique, true, right, and boom. So what I normally do as a developer personally is that I don't like creating some of these restrictions, you know, like unique, index of, it should be 5 characters, trying to do some validation on the database. I don't do that. And it's not really too advisable to do that. So you write a validation in your backend application to be able to validate the data that will be coming in. I think that's the right thing to do. And even if you must have to do any validation from the back end, just from the database, try as much as possible to minimize it. It shouldn't be too much so you don't run into a problem. So this is just the longhand way, but I always like the shorthand way. So what I want is a string. So, and I don't care if it is unique or not. Is that okay? On a NOS, we want the password field to be unique, but I'm going to be writing that during my validation to make it unique on my backend. So that's the right thing to always do. So the full name here is going to be a string as well. And we also have password, so separate with a comma. We have password. So we have a password field, and that password is still also going to be a string. You can also tell it the length that you want it to be. So you can put the length you want it to be, but as I said before now, I don't want us to be doing the validation here. So we have the password, and then what else do we need? We need the full name, the email, the password. I think that's for now. In the nearest future, we might need a token, right? Now, I don't think we will need it for now. If we need it, I'm going to bring it in. So let's just leave all this and just to keep things very simple. So what we're just going to do, what we actually want to do here is our ability to be able to create this user. Then once we're able to create this user, we'll create a login, we'll create some level of authentication, and that is all we want to do with this. So this is the password, the username, and that's good to go. So these are the strings. So it has been defined, the structure has been defined, but it's not going to work until you make it a model. So how do we do that? So we go outside of this and create a model. Say let. So we're going to call this one user model. Now the user model is going to be, now it has a method which is going to say mongoose dot model, just like mongoose.schema. So it takes 2 parameters. Now the 2 parameters it takes, the first one is actually the name of the model. So the name of the model is going to be user. So we're using a capital letter. Please be consistent with this. When you're creating a model, use a capital letter, start it with a capital letter. Now this model, if you go to your database, you're going to see it, Mongoose is automatically going to change it to lowercase and add S to it, users. Is that okay? So for the sake of our consistency, always make your model to be capital letter. Now, the next thing we have to bring in is the database schema. That is this whole thing. We want to bring it in. And that's why we created this variable called user schema. So we want to bring in that. So we're going to put it here and boom, we go. So we have the user schema. Now, the next thing that we want to do is to import our model. So we say module.export. So what we are exporting is called user model. So that's what we're exporting. So we just export the user model and boom, we are good to go. So with this, we now have a structure of our database, how the database actually looks like, right? Now, the most important thing that we didn't do, which I skipped the first time, is going to be the ID feed. Now, this guy is not too smart to be able to automatically create the ID feed. So that ID feed is what actually makes each of them very, very unique, right? No two, record will have the same ID. So I'm going to place that first, and that is called ID. I'm just calling it ID. You can call it underscore ID, right? You can call it user ID. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the same name with mine. So let's say ID, right? And now this ID is going to be having a type of a mongoose. It's called, let me explain that quickly. I think I did something. Okay, it's going to come from mongoose dot type dot objects ID. That's going to be, I think that's going to be the name, the stuff that it comes with. That's the data type, right? So I just checked the documentation. It's actually mongoose.schema.type.objects. So it's mongoose.schema.types.objects. So this is it. So this is the data type that it comes with. So I'm just going to just make emphasis on this. And I mean, when I mean make emphasis on it, just put it as an object and say this is the type. I can leave it that same way, it's going to work, but just want to make emphasis on this. So this is the type of data that we are making for the IED. Now, this type of data, you'll be wondering, where is this coming from? This is a unique way that the MongoDB creates its own unique ID. So creating this unique ID actually makes it much more easy for it to be able to create different kind of unique ID without you telling it how the data type is, or what kind of ID, how it should look like, without you giving much description. So this is the data type for it. So next class, we're going to be, seeing how we can access things in this and sync something into this database. Thank you very much. Bye.